All right, folks, I've got two presentations to do today. The first one is going to be the overview of the final project. So I'm going to give you sort of all the information that you need to know about this, and I will put up these slides in sort of a separate location as well. And then we'll move on to lecture 7B, which is all about event-driven programming. All right, so for the final project for this class, you're going to be creating an application. It's going to be a GUI application using JavaFX, and you'll be working in a group. So the reason why we do this specifically so early, so if you're in your freshman year, this is only the second semester. So we do it so early because you will be doing this sort of thing throughout the rest of your time here. It doesn't really matter what major you're in. There's always going to be some sort of project-based thing that you're going to end up doing. So most of the fundamental concepts. CS1 was those sort of very sort of fundamental things, and then we moved to sort of more OOP with our abstract classes and our inheritance and our polymorphism and our interfaces. With that information, you can make a lot of very cool apps. And most of what you learn from sort of now on is going to be, learning a new language. So you might learn some Python, you might learn some C or some C++ later on. You might learn some new external libraries. So JavaFX, for example, is an external library. You might learn maybe some sort of specific algorithms for solving sort of standard problem types. You may learn about some good program design. But in the end, you're pretty much done learning the basics. After CS2, it's really just expanding your capabilities because you know those basics. It also lets you work with your classmates. Any sort of large projects are almost never done by one person alone. There are sort of examples out there, but most of the time when you go on co-op, you go out after you graduate for sort of the real world, real job sort of thing, you will likely be part of a team. And it gets you talking about your work. That's one of the things that I think in a lot of places is not it's not sort of done as much. If you were at, say, another university, for example, you may not be presenting the stuff that you've done until you become a junior or senior or something. So we want to get you presenting about your work early, because those skills to sort of talk about what you've done and explain it to people that either may not know a lot about the topic or might be evaluating you for a job or a co-op or something. I think starting that early is very important. And I do think this is way better than a final exam. So you will be working on a project. I could probably show you in the future, maybe in the next few weeks, maybe at one of the labs or something, I can show you what other folks have done. I give you a couple of examples. Likely, I will put some examples of each of the sort of pieces that are due up on Blackboard as well, so you can get an idea of what other folks have worked on and done in the past. So format-wise, it's going to be 2 to 3 students. It's going to be your choice as to who you work with. So I'm not specifically going to assign the teams, but you will need to be part of a team. I don't allow any solos in this particular situation. What that means is that I may end up putting somebody on your team. For example, if some folks can't find a team or something, then I may end up choosing a few teams for folks. But for the most part, you feel free to choose 2 to 3 folks yourself. It must have a GUI and it must use JavaFX. There are, of course, other ways to make GUIs out there in Java, but since we are covering JavaFX in this class, you will be using JavaFX. And it's got to use some of the topics that we covered in CS2. I'm not saying you have to use everything in here, but things like inheritance are probably going to be useful for you. Maybe making some abstract classes, maybe using the generics that we just talked about. In the future, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about things like iterators and collections and recursion. So some of these topics that you see, if you can find a place to fit them in, that is good. And of course, the topics that we've already talked about, inheritance and stuff, those are going to be useful for you as well in pretty much whatever application you decide to make. All right, so overall, there's sort of 4 deliverables plus sort of one little extra thing. So you will be doing a little project proposal. I want to know what you are doing before you really start working on it. So that is due by March 12th at the end of the day. So you need to come up with your group and you need to figure out what you are going to be trying to create. I will give you an example of sort of what each of these things needs to contain in the following slides. There will be a group presentation. It'll be sort of in class or lab, probably stretching the last week of classes plus finals day. So we'll schedule that sort of once I know how many teams there are. We'll look at how much time we have, and we'll sort of schedule those out so that everybody can get their presentations in. I will want the slides, so you will be uploading the slides to Blackboard, ideally the day before before you actually give the presentation. You will be giving me the JavaFX project as well, so you can submit that. Most people just zip it up and submit it to Blackboard, so I'll make sure to do that, and that'll be due the day of your presentation. And then you will have a report as well, so you will give me something written. This will be submitted via Blackboard the same time as your JavaFX project. So those are sort of the 4 things that are worth the grade piece. And then there will be a short peer evaluation. Basically, because you worked as a group, you can praise or complain about your group in the peer evaluation. Those are things that I do take account when I do the final grade. As far as the presentation goes, I will be letting you see what the rubric is. So as you're giving a presentation, we'll do it, of course, via Zoom. I will be sort of filling in the rubric stuff that I have, so you will know what that looks like beforehand. But those are the sort of main deliverables. All right, so the proposal, I don't want to read some long proposal. It's just 1 page at most. You're going to, of course, upload it via Blackboard, 1 per team. So you can just pick a team member to do the submission. If you think an idea might be too complex, or you think maybe an idea might be too simple, then talk with me ahead of time. I'm more than happy to talk about any sorts of ideas that you might have. So you can send me an email. You and your team could drop in during an office hours, anything like that. The parts to this, ideally, you're going to put something in about the problem you're trying to solve, and that it's not necessarily like a math problem. It's just we want to program something that creates a schedule for you based on when you're available and when you're not, or we want to create a game that does this, and this. That's what I mean by problem trying to be solved, or problem to be solved. Talk a little bit about the topics to be covered. You may not know ahead of time that you're going to use a bunch of inheritance, or that you might use some abstract classes, but try to think about what your project entails and think about if there might be a use for it. Of course, for a proposal, things change. And if you end up changing the structure of your program, so it's different from what you originally thought, that's fine. But think of ideas for what is going to sort of be fulfilling some of those topics that we've talked about. It'd be nice to have a rough schedule of tasks for each of the group members, which would sort of equate to sort of a rough schedule. Of course, things take longer than you think they will, even if you account for them taking longer. So, try to come up with a schedule and try to stick to it. Of course, the members of the team, and then sort of the work division. So the set of tasks, rough schedule, work division, those all sort of go together. And then, of course, I'd want to know who the members of the team are. So it doesn't have to be long. And again, I will put some examples of these up so that you can see what those look like. All right, the project presentation does have to be the entire team. I'm thinking typically around 10 minutes. I've had teams in the past go much longer than that, where I've had to cut them off. I've had teams in the past go, 5 minutes, 4 minutes. So try to do a little practicing. Try to get together on Zoom and just practice it out and see how long it takes for your practice session. There will be a little bit of time for questions. I typically do ask questions, so that's something to keep in mind. When you give your presentation, you'll want to have a few sections as well, things like motivation. Why are you solving this problem? What is this problem? What are you trying to create? Maybe some sort of relevant background, especially if it's something that not a lot of people are familiar with. Maybe you're making a game that not a lot of people have heard of before. Then some relevant background is nice. Include design-related things as well. If you create some UML diagrams, awesome. Show those. Show some screenshots, maybe even of some of the development process. That's, hey, we went from here to here to here. If you have some sort of flow chart for some sort of actions that are happening, show that. If you make any sort of images or diagrams of things, those are worth putting in. If you use any sort of special algorithms or tools or extra libraries or something, I've had students in the past use a library called Beautiful Soup, and that's able to scrape from websites. So their app was a weather app, and it would scrape from a weather website and then display all the stuff related to the weather for the zip code that you typed in, for example. So they talked a bit about beautiful soup in this sort of section. I don't want to see lots of code. That's for me to do. I'll show you lots of code, but I don't want to see lots of code. The problem with showing lots of code during a presentation like this, especially a short presentation, is it doesn't tell a whole lot. If you want to talk about an algorithm and you want to show a little bit of pseudocode, so stuff that's not really programming, but sort of more English focused on how an algorithm works, that's fine, especially if you if we haven't seen that style of algorithm before. But showing just straight up code, it's not useful to a lot of folks. It's better to either describe what's happening or just leave it out altogether. And of course, we're going to want to see a demo. So that's what we're looking at for the presentation. And again, I will put up some past presentations for you to see what those look like before. The evaluation of the presentation, the grading factors, things like length. If you go way too short or you go way too long, that's going to be a problem. Clarity, so that it's not confusing as to what you're doing or why you're doing it. Professionalism, of course, that means practice some. Whole team does have to participate, and just overall explanation of the topic coverage. So, if you use some inheritance, show us why, show us how. And then, of course, the demo quality, which is mostly subjective. So again, I will give you the rubric so you can see what that looks like and see how I grade things. But these are the most important factors in the grading process. All right, so the whole JavaFX project should be submitted directly. Only one person in the team has to do this. You can zip it up or whatever. I have fail groups who've just copied stuff from the internet. I've had a group in the past, for example, I forget what game they made. They made a particular game, and I'd asked a question during their final presentation, and they didn't know how to answer it. And it was a question that if you coded it, you would know how to answer it. So I was a little bit suspicious, and then I was able to I found the code that they submitted to me on a Russian website. So don't do that. Don't just copy code from the internet. That's not going to end well for you. So overall, you are required to submit the code that you use, and I will download it and open it up and play it and look at it and all that kind of stuff. All right, the largest thing here is the project report. So again, this is one per team. Just upload a PDF. At most, I say 5 pages. If you're a little bit over that, depending on what you do, that's fine. And I'll put an example of some of a previous group's report up. This is kind of like taking your presentation and putting it into writing. So you're going to talk about the problem description. What are you trying to make? Why are you trying to make it? Your design, how the topics that we covered in class built up to the solution, how you implemented the various things. UML diagrams could be interesting here, the extra tools, resources, maybe some instructions, and maybe a screenshot or two of the program in action. So it's more or less like the report or like the presentation, but put into more of a written form. And I will put I put 1 or 2 versions of this up as well from previous semesters. All right, and the last thing is the peer evaluation. So each member is basically just going to rate their own performance and that of their team members. So the ideal situation here is that everybody contributed equally, and it was great for everybody, rainbows and rose petals. But if there's some sort of discrepancy, this is where I can take the grade and mess with it. You do need to turn this in. So even though this is not part of the full 100% of the final project, you do need to turn this in. I've had issues in the past where a lot of folks didn't turn stuff in, and I do dock your grade for that. So if you don't individually turn one in, this is one that everybody does. Then I sort of make the assumption that, well, you didn't really do any work, so I will mess with mess with the sort of points that this is related to. So make sure that you turn one in. I'll make sure to remind you, of course. But this doesn't have to be long. We're not talking like pages and pages of stuff. You throw a paragraph in, awesome. That works. All right. Lastly, I want to talk about some example topics here, because this is definitely a big sort of field here. A lot of folks do games. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you specifically when we're going through the event-driven programming, and then some of the examples that we might do in lab or that I might do sort of during the end of one of the lectures will relate to a lot of sort of game type stuff. So people have done Battleship before, people have done Connect 4. I haven't had anyone do Breakout yet, but that's certainly one that wouldn't be too tough to do. Folks have done like Space Invaders, and I've had folks sort of create their own types of games like let's see, there was sort of a similar game, a similar style to like 2048 and stuff. So people have done a lot of sort of different games. Potentially, you could do Game of Life. That's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on, or sort of your Game of Life with modifications, like a wildfire simulation. People have done that before. People have done forest fire simulations in my class before, so that's something that you can always think about too. I haven't had anybody do a Sudoku solver, but Sudoku solvers are relatively straightforward. You sort of read in a matrix that would represent the Sudoku puzzle, and then you solve it. So so puzzle solvers like that are definitely cool. If you want to mess around with maybe certain types of data structures or algorithms, then you can do that as well. I've had folks do some machine learning stuff before. I haven't had anyone do an elevator simulation. If you played so long ago, this is we're talking like probably early 90s or something. I'd have to look it up, but there was a game made by Maxis, the folks that do like SimCity and stuff, and it was called Sim Tower. And in the end, it was just an elevator simulation. Just like SimCity is essentially a traffic simulator, or at least the early ones were. So it was basically an elevator simulation. And if that's something that you want to mess with, if you want to try to do some kind of elevator simulation or traffic simulation or some machine learning type stuff, that would certainly be doable. I've had one class do a machine learning type of thing before. They didn't use a GUI for it, which I did okay. I think in the future, I think we could use the GUI if somebody wanted to do this. You could use a GUI to represent sort of what's going on in the machine learning. So that's something that if you wanted to do, I might talk to you about a little bit. We're going to do a little bit of image processing in this class. Just some very basic stuff. So if you wanted to extend that, I've had a group in the past do sort of a simple sort of image program where you sort of load your images into the program, and then you can do, you can click on them to bring them up, and then you could like change the brightness and stuff in them all through a GUI. So that's a very possible thing as well. I haven't had anyone take me up on some of the hardware stuff. Before, generally you're going to need to do something with sensors, and we don't have a lot of hardware stuff sort of available for you, so that this might mean purchasing some stuff. I imagine since we're sort of all over Zoom, this would be not very feasible at this point. But if your group wants to do something with say like Lego Mindstorms or with the Raspberry Pi or with some sort of Arduino type system, again typically with sensors, then that's something that I can entertain as well. I had one engineering group, or one group of folks that were engineering majors that were sort of considering doing some Arduino stuff, but they decided not to in the end. So if you have an idea for some sort of game you want to make, some sort of project you want to do, and you're not sure if it's going to be feasible in the time we have, you can definitely ask me. Otherwise, I do want to see a little proposal so that I know what everyone's doing, and I can give a little feedback. So if you're saying, well, I want to make a blackjack game, that's probably not going to fly, since we're basically building one, and I have that sort of full blackjack PDF up and available. So that's probably not going to fly. So that's one reason why I want to know, because I can give you some feedback about things you might want to think of. I think the most ambitious project a group has endeavored to do in the past was doing Clue. The board game Clue, and they couldn't quite get all the board mechanics down, so it was a little bit too ambitious. So try to keep it relatively small, because you are still learning stuff about JavaFX and about some of the sort of mechanics of Java itself. So I can definitely give direction. I like doing that. I like sort of thinking about these problems along with you if you get stuck, but try not to make the project sort of too big. Again, something like Connect 4, I've had people do checkers. I had a group that they tried to do Uno. They didn't get all the features down, but they did get a bunch of the features of Uno down. So that's sort of some example topics, some examples of things that people have done in the past. All right, so that's the last slide for this one. I will put this up in a sort of separate location so that you have access to these slides and you can always sort of see exactly what I want. And I'll make sure to put this information, or at least a reference to this information, in the standard weekly email, probably every week from now until the end. If you have any questions, definitely make sure that you let me know sooner rather than later. All right, so let's go. Let's see. Yeah, so I've got one more presentation. This one's not sort of too long, but it's going to get our hands dirty with some interactions, some event-driven interactions in our actual GUIs. So typically this is called like event-driven programming, or like you're creating an event-driven application. So let's go back to sort of JavaFX. So we learned some of the basic sort of JavaFX sort of GUI stuff, like shapes and buttons and how to arrange them. We create panels, and we stack things on the panels, and then that gets turned into a scene, and then the scene gets put on the stage, which is the window. So the missing piece of this so far has been the interaction. So to have the GUI, whatever you code, interact with the user, we need to have those elements, buttons, key presses, whatever, respond to user actions. So if we press a key, maybe we want to print something to the screen, or we want to play a sound, or whatever it might be. So typically, the sort of the process for this is to create a GUI, of course. So it's sort of stuff we've sort of already talked about and stuff we will do today in examples. And then you register a class to handle the events. Sometimes this is referred to as a listener. And then you implement handling code within the listener. This will make more sense once we actually do it, but I'll point out some of these sort of individual pieces when these sort of registration stuff actually happens. So basically, you implement a way for the GUI to handle an event through an interface. And this is why we talked about interfaces before we got back into some of this event-driven stuff. So I already have a JavaFX project ready to go. So make sure that you can do this. Make sure you can create a JavaFX project so you can actually see your window. And we're going to create a GUI that has 3 buttons. So this is going to be like Goldilocks and the 3 buttons or something. And I'm going to go code this up. And this doesn't have any interaction, at least not yet. That's what we're going to add next. After we have the actual GUI itself. So I have my JavaFX application. I've already extended application. So my main contains just launch, and then I have start. So this is where I'm going to start putting in the actual sort of GUI stuff. So I'm going to make an HBox. This is a type of pane. It makes it so everything is aligned horizontally. So again, think of this as my pane, and I'm actually going to call it pane. And this is what we're going to put those buttons on. So this is going to be a new HBox. And the value in here is basically the size of sort of the spacing between each horizontal component that I add to it. So again, I'm going to add my buttons here in the near future. Now, HBox, of course, needs to be imported. So this is import HBox from JavaFX scene layout. And if I look up here, I got a whole bunch of stuff imported, but I needed to import HBox. We could actually get rid of probably most of this stuff here, and we re-import HBox and stage. There we go. So that way we're just down to the minimum that we need. So just remember, whenever you sort of type something in like this, check if it needs to be imported. All right, I'm going to use a. Let's create the buttons first, and let's see what this looks like. And then I'm going to show you another possibility to sort of help align things. So let's make a few buttons. So I'm going to make a button called BTN-P for the sort of pop-up button. And this is going to be a new button. And if I put some text into the constructor for the button, that's what the button's going to say. So I need to make sure to import button from JavaFX scene control, not Java AWT. We're not using the abstract window stuff. We're using JavaFX, so make sure to import it. And then I'm just going to create a couple more buttons. And one of them will be the mama button and the baby button. So we got mama and we got baby. So those are my 3 buttons. Now they're not in the pane yet. I've created them. They sort of exist, but they wouldn't be in the GUI yet. So I need to take my pane. And I need to say pane.getChildren. add, and I'm going to actually use add all. So I can put more than one thing in here to add. So I'm going to put btnp, comma btnm, comma btnb. You could do it individually. You could just place sort of one at a time, say get children add, and then one button, get children add the second one and the third one, but this just puts them all in just one line. All right, so let's take the primary stage. And let's set the title. So that's the title at the top of the window to the Goldilocks and the 3 buttons. Sort of motivates our name for this. And make sure we spell title right. Yep. And we're going to do primary stage dot set scene. Now I haven't created a scene. I haven't created a scene in here, so I'm just going to create a new scene with the pane, the particular pane I'm using, the H box here, as the only component, just like that. I need to make sure to import scene as well. And then I'll say primary stage dot show. And let's see what that looks like. All right, so it looks okay. It's just sort of we got our 3 buttons. They have their separation, which is what we want. That's what the 100 here is doing. There's another alignment thing that we could do. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to put it right down here. So I'm going to say pane dot set alignment. Do that so you can see the here. So this is going to set that alignment to something specific. In this case, we're going to use pos.center. So this is going to give you a center, or give us a center alignment. We do have to import pos for position here. And then save and run. And as I drag this around, it'll stay in the center. So I drag the sort of the size here. So that's what the alignment does. It's not strictly necessary for what we were doing. It didn't matter that they were up in the corner, but if you want to set some alignment parameters, you can do that. So again, I'm not expecting you to know that offhand, right? Because it's not something, unless you sort of study what the library can do or you see the examples, that you're going to know that you can do. But there are tons and tons of functions out there that will let you do things like this. So it's sort of worth looking into some of these things, like, oh, set alignment. That sounds like it's sort of what I want to keep things centered. And in fact, it does. All right, so this is about as far as we've sort of gotten in getting this stuff to work. We've just created a GUI like this. Of course, the buttons don't do anything. So let's add some interaction to this. So if we go back to our presentation here, this is basically what I just coded. All right, so now we are going to add some interaction, and I'm going to do it in 3 separate ways. The first way is going to be a separate class. The second way is going to be an anonymous class. And the third way is going to be a Lambda function. So I'm going to show you all 3 ways to do this. So when we handle the event, we're going to implement the appropriate interface. And I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do that 3 times. So the first thing that we need is we need to know what button we want to do what. So I'm going to start with let's do the sort of creating a separate class. So I'm gonna right click on my project here. I'm going to say create a new class, and I'm going to call this class just right. And that's it. So it's just going to look like this, and it's going to implement. So it's going to implement a particular interface. And this interface is what's going to allow us to handle the interaction when the button gets pressed. This is going to implement the event handler. And specifically, the type of event it's going to deal with is an action event. And of course, I will need to import event handler and action event. Make sure you get the JavaFX version of these. All right, so this is the thing that I want to implement. I look at the just right, and it says add unimplemented methods, and so now I have this handle that I need to write. All we're going to do here is we're going to say system out printf, and I'm going to print out just right, and maybe new line, sure, and that's it. So the whole purpose of this class is to implement event handler action event so that I can write this method. Now I'm going to go back to my sort of start method here, and we're going to take the I'll do it right down here. After I've created the button, I'm going to take the button B, and I'm going to say set on action. So when I click that button, I'm going to send in here a new, so notice that the parameter for this is an event handler action event. So I'm going to send in a new just right function, a new just right object, which has this handle function because it implements an event handler action event. So if I click baby, it prints just right in the console. And every time I click it, it's going to run that action. I set on action a new just right, which remember has a event handler action event, and it runs this function. It runs the handle function. We did this a little bit when we first talked about interfaces, where we could sort of send in a object that implements a particular interface that we need, and it will run whatever that function is. In this case, it's running the just right one. Now, this means we need an extra file. We have to create this event handler action event class that implements this and write this stuff in. But there's ways to do it without the extra file. So I'm going to use the pop-up button here. And we're going to say set on action. So it's the exact same thing, except now we're going to use an anonymous class. I'm going to say new event handler action event. Now, typically you can't do this. Make sure to import event handler and import action event. Now, obviously, typically you can't do this. The error here says cannot instantiate the type event handler action event. But I don't want to create an object out of this. I want to define an anonymous class. So after I finish writing the sort of the new action or the new event handler action event, I'm going to put my two brackets, my two curly brackets here, and I'm going to put sort of an enter between it. So now on the next line. Now, if I hover over, I can add unimplemented methods. And here's that handle method. Again, the same one that we put in just right. So I've created an anonymous class where I can fill in handle right here without having to go back to a new class that just implements this, that has the handle function. I can do everything right here. So I can say system out, printf, and Papa was, say, too hot. Something like that. So I run the code now. Of course, baby is still going to print just right. Papa prints too hot. Now we're going to do the third way. So for mama, we're going to say btn m dot set on action. I'm going to use the lambda function. This is the most compact way to do this. Look at the handle function. What does the handle function take? It takes one argument. So I'm going to put for the lambda function, I need to put the argument. I'm just going to put E, and I'm going to use the arrow notation for a lambda function. And then I'm going to put, in this case, I'm going to put system.out.printf, and I'm going to say too cold. And new line. And that's it. So I'll run it again. And I'll say baby is just right. Papa is too hot. Mama, too cold. So those are the three ways. This way uses a class that implements event handler action event. This one creates an anonymous class. So it's essentially it creates a new object where we set handle. So let's see, creates a new. I'll just say anonymous. Creates an anonymous class where we write that handle function. And then this one is a lambda function. The event handler action event is a functional interface. It only contains one function we need to worry about, handle. So that's why we can do that here. That's why we can use a lambda function. This is the parameter that comes in. In this case, that's this arg0. I've just named it E. And then this is what the function does. This is saying that E comes in. Here's what the function does. And if I wanted to write this out a little bit more explicitly, I could put parentheses around this. This is my parameter list. I could have curly brackets around here. And then as soon as I put the curly brackets in, then I need to make sure to do more regular syntax with like a semicolon and stuff. So this will still work for mama here, the too cold. So most of the time, like 99% of the time, actually probably 100% of the time, I will use either a lambda function or an anonymous class. As we get used to doing this, I'll probably use lambda functions a little bit more. But if the lambda function, if you're just not as comfortable with it, this works just fine. To me, this is more explicit as to saying what's happening. What are you doing? I'm creating a new event handler action event, and I'm overriding handle. And I'm just doing an anonymous class instead of writing my own class that does the same thing. So that's something that you want to think about. Typically, don't use this. There's typically not a reason to. There might be certain situations where you would, but we're likely not. Use an anonymous class to do this, or use a lambda function, and you can do any sort of interaction you want using stuff like this. So we're gonna look at another one here in just a second. So I think I'm gonna close out just right here. We're gonna go back to close the buttons. Go back to the slides, and yeah. Okay, so now we're going to make another JavaFX application that lets us grow and shrink a circle via buttons. This one's, it's a little bit longer, but in the end, it's not sort of that difficult. We're going to put a circle on the screen. We're going to set the fill to white, the stroke to black. We're going to put two buttons in, grow and shrink. The only thing that we sort of really need to mess with is some of the alignment stuff. So I'll show you some of the ways to get the buttons sort of aligned where we want them, and we can also think about what the think about the title. Although I may not throw much in here for that, but we can sort of think about what we want maybe for the title. So yeah, so let's go create one of those. So I'm just going to delete what I have here because I don't necessarily need it. But of course, you could always create a new project. I'm just not going to bother doing it. All right, so let's create the circle. We do need a circle, and I'm just going to call it circle C. This is a new circle, and let's make its radius 50 to start with. And the first thing we're going to do is just get the circle on the screen along with a couple of buttons, and then we'll add the button interactions. Let's set the stroke. So C, that's my circle, dot set stroke, and let's make that color dot black. Of course, you can make this any color you want. This needs to be all caps. Go. And we'll do the set the fill to, let's just do color.white. And we need to make sure to import color, of course. Make sure that you use the JavaFX version. And let's create a couple buttons. So button, I'm going to call one grow. This is just a new button. And just like with the previous buttons we made, I'm going to put grow in here just as the text in the constructor. And we'll make another button as well. I'm just going to copy and paste this, and this will be shrink. Easy enough for the circle and the buttons. Now let's create let's do this in sort of 2 steps. And I think this is what I do in the slides as well. I don't exactly remember how I set this up. Let's do it in 2 steps. Let's create an HBox for the buttons. Remember, we created the HBox previously for our Goldilocks buttons. So we'll do sort of the same thing for the buttons. So they're going to be sort of horizontally right next to each other. And then we will set the circle and sort of stack it on top of the buttons using a VBox. So we're going to use 2 panes here. So I'm going to create an HBox, and I'm just going to call it HB. So this will be our HBox or horizontal box. It's a new HBox. And let's add the 2 buttons to that. Did I get rid of the HBox one? Oh, this needs to be capital B. There we go. All right, and then let's do hb.getChildren. .add, we're going to do add all, and we're going to add grow. It's the grow button and the shrink button. Okay, so we've added the buttons to the box. Now let's set some of the parameters here. Remember, we set like the spacing of stuff to 100 by using like a 100 in here. Those are just other functions. So we could be like hb.set spacing, and we can say let's say 10. We want them sort of 10 pixels apart from each other. We can do an hb.set alignment as well. We did that before. So this is pos.center. So they're always going to be centered no matter what we do. This needs to be all caps. And there's some other ones. Maybe we'll come back and do some insets or something. But for now, this should be okay for what we want. So we put these next to each other. So from sort of a picture perspective, if we were to let's actually do the primary stage and stuff like that first. So let's say for my primary, and then we'll make the VBox here in a second. Primary stage. Let's just do set title here. I'm going to make this circle for now. We might come back and put the actual like radius in there, like you saw in the picture on the slide. And then we'll do primary stage dot set scene. We'll do the same thing that we did before. We're going to say new scene, and I'm going to send in the HBox. So that's the HB. And let's actually give a size for this. Let's say we want 200 by 200 for this. A 200 by 200 window, and then we'll do primary stage dot show. So this should just be our HBox. So we haven't done anything with the circle yet, but I'll show you how we're going to do that in a second. So there's our grow and shrink. Now, obviously, we want the circle to be above. If we just added the circle to the HBox, then the circle's just going to be like over here, or depending on what order we put it in, over here. So it's going to be to the side. We don't want that. We want it above. So let's create another pane. I'm going to create a VBox. It's going to be a vertical box. I'll call it VB. It's going to be a new VBox. And we're going to add 2 things to it. So I need to make sure to import VBox as well. We're going to add 2 things to it. So I'm going to do VB.getChildren .add all. And the first one I'm going to add is the circle. That's my circle C. And then I'm also going to add HB, my HBox. And we're going to do the set alignment thing as well. So I'm going to copy that line, put that down here, and change this to VB. Now in my scene, I'm still just doing the HB. So if I do this, then I'm going to get some weird stuff here because HB was already set in stuff, and so I get an error here because I put HB in here, but now I'm trying to put HB here too, which is actually not going to work. So we need to change this now to VB. Let me show you what happens. There we go. So now we've got the vertical box. So think about it like this. We've got this little H box right here that contains 2 things. And then within my vertical box, which is now this thing here, I added the circle first. So the circle goes on top. And then I added the H box, which is this piece, second, which means it's going to be on the bottom. And then I displayed this thing in the window. So that's why I get something that looks like this. Now we can do some other alignment stuff as well. I might look at, let's do an inset thing. Let's see if we can get this a little bit further away. Maybe we can do some padding or something. Let's actually do that in the VBox here. So let's do VB.set spacing, and let's put 10 in there as well. I think that'll have this sort of look a little better. There we go. So we got a little space there between the buttons and the and the circle itself. So that's the idea here with sort of stacking these these boxes, stacking these things up on each other. So you can make very complex looking GUIs by creating a bunch of V boxes and H boxes and then just sort of stacking them on each other. Okay, so right now the buttons don't do anything, which is sort of overall that's fine, but we probably want it to do something more interesting. Now, I am going to throw the little radius thing in here. So rather than just the circle like this, I'm going to say string.format, and let's put circle like we had before, but let's do the colon and then a %d. And for this %d, I'm going to do my circle, that's c.get radius. Actually, this is going to be this should be a double value. So let's change this to %f, but we might want like just like 0.0f maybe. Let's see. Since get radius brings you back a double, then we want to make sure we print that properly. There we go. So we see 50. The 0.0 means there's not going to be anything after the decimal place. So I've got this circle 50. So I'll show you how we can change that here in just a few minutes. All right. So now we got something that looks similar to what I had on the slides. All right. Now let's add the interaction to the buttons, and I'm just going to put it right after I create the button. So I'm going to put the interaction for grow right here. So I'm going to say grow.set on action. And I'm going to use a anonymous class for both of these rather than a Lambda function. But again, you could use a Lambda function here. It wouldn't be too much trouble. So I'm going to create a new event handler, action event. And then I'm going to put my open close parenthesis and my open close curly brackets, and then move my cursor over one and press enter. So I get my cursor now between those brackets. Then let's see, we've got here, let's make sure that we, oh, did I spell that wrong? Yes, I spelled it wrong. There we go. And then we'll make sure to add unimplemented methods. So there's my handle. So this is where I'm going to put whatever I want to change. So what we are going to do is we're going to do c.set radius. So we're going to change the radius to whatever the radius was, c.get radius. So whatever the radius was, so 50 to start with, and we're going to add 3 to it. So this would be getting the radius with this 50. This value would become 53, and we would set the radius to 53. And for now, that's it. We are going to add one more thing in here in just a moment. But for now, that's it. And so shrink will be the exact same thing. It'll be grow.set on action, and then we're going to have a new event handler action event. Open close parenthesis, open close curly brackets, do sort of one return down, and then add unimplemented methods. And we'll do the exact same thing here. I'm going to say c.set radius, c.get radius -3. Easy enough. Now, you do have to do this. You do absolutely have to use the c.get radius because we want to know what the radius was. So if I just put 50 in here, then it's always going to be 50 there. And so the new radius then would always be either 53 or 47. So we do want to make sure we grab the radius. So if I run this, expand this a little bit so we can see the 50 up here. Oh, looks like my grow is not doing what I want. Ah, yep. Yep, I used grow here again. I need to shrink. There we go. Small little bug, equivalent to a copy paste bug, but I didn't actually copy paste. I actually typed it. Okay, so now we should get the grow working, and if we do the shrink should work as well. So every time I click that button, that radius is changing. Now you notice up here in the title's not changing because we just set that once at the beginning of the program when we first open the window, and we don't ever change it again. We just did it right here. Now I'm going to take this, I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to do Control C. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to put it in here as well. I'm going to do this and this. So after we set the radius to the new value, let's just change the title. We're going to change the title to whatever the get radius was. So every time I press the button, remember, this is the code that runs. And if I want anything to update, like the name of the title of the window, this is what I need to do. And make sure that I run some code that updates that. So now if I press grow, now it says 53. If I press shrink a few times, now it's 47. And you sort of watch this go up. So that is our interaction for this grow and shrink a circle. All right, the code for this is, of course, in the slides here. And it looks like I did something similar. I used some insets here for the horizontal box, but in the end, it ended up being the same. I don't think in this one, in this one I just set the title of the circle. So the stuff that I wrote in there where we actually changed the name of the title, I did not actually put in the stuff here. But this is the style that you can very easily use for things like buttons, and actually for just about any of the types of actions that you could have. Keyboard presses, mouse presses, they all work in the same way. They might not all be action events or set on action, but they're going to be something similar. All right, so let's take a look at some of those other actions. So we messed around with action events. That's basically what we've done. But there's other ones as well. There's window events. If you close the window, you could have stuff happen. I remember there's been sort of games that I've played in the past where as soon as you say quit, it will sort of ask you, "Are you sure?" Or I think one of them, like way back when, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri was like, "Please don't leave. The drones need you," sort of thing when you went to quit. So window events certainly do something with that. If you close the window, you could have it do something. Input events, those are things like keyboard presses and stuff. And mouse button stuff. So input events are keyboard and mouse. Action events are things like pressing buttons on the screen. Window events are changing the window. And that can be closing the window, but that could also be maximizing the window or minimizing the window. You can do certain things. So these are all events. They're all different kinds of things that you could put in the event handler. So we were doing action event, but of course, if you wanted to make a key event, press the up arrow or something, it moves something up, you could do that. Now, the event object itself, so if we go back to the code for just a second, the action event object, this arg0, which sometimes is written just as event, like this object contains information about the actual event that happened. So you could do things like get source on that event. You can figure out certain things like which mouse button was pressed. Was it the left, the right, the middle? Was it mouse 4, mouse 5, whatever it might be? So all of these subclasses of the event objects, they deal with different types of events that happen. So you can check information about information that might be relevant to what event happened. For us here, we didn't really matter information about the event. We just know that if we clicked a button, we changed something. But in other things like the mouse movements or mouse clicks, you might want to know other information. Where on the screen did the user click? Which mouse button was it? What key was pressed? For example, if you have a key event, it'd be useful to know which key was actually pressed. So there's other information that this sort of event object contains. Specifically, for keys are a pretty important one, a pretty good example of that. What key was actually pressed? That's something we would need to check through the object itself if we had a key event. All right, so the different kinds of buttons and the different kinds of events and the handlers here they're important to know. When you click a button, the object that you would be clicking on is the button object. The type of event is an action event. That's why we had the event handler be an action event. And the function you use is set on action. That's why we use that's why we said button dot set on action. And then we created the new event handler, action event. When you press enter in a text field, when you check or uncheck, say a radio button or a checkbox or a combo box, all of these are the same type of event. You all use set on action and you all use action events. Now for mouse presses and mouse movements, so pressed, released, clicked, entered, exited, and moved. These are all mouse events. And so you use the set on mouse and then the thing you want, pressed, released, clicked, entered. exited, moved, dragged. And they have different event handler stuff here. It's your event handler mouse event, different than our action event previously. And then for keys, it's key pressed, released, and typed. These are key events. And you do set on key pressed, released, and typed. And these are the event handler here is for key events. So this sort of tells you exactly what functions you need to use when you're doing some of this, some of these sort of events. So I'm going to show you one with a key event next. This will be our sort of last example for today. I'm going to show you one with a key event. So we're going to have an object on the screen. I'm just going to make some text. And when we use the arrow keys, we're going to move it around. It's going to move kind of slowly. It's not going to constantly move. So we're not doing like a snake game at the moment. But when we press the arrow keys, this thing's going to move around the screen. So let's see. It's going to look like, I think it's on the next slide. No, we have the mouse event thing. Okay, so the mouse events are. I mentioned that they have a lot of sort of options for us. We can check things like click count, get button. Again, which button was pressed, where it was in the X and Y, where it was in the scene, where it was on the screen, and then modifiers as well. Were you control clicking? Were you alt clicking? Were you shift clicking? That sort of thing. So if you do want to do mouse event things in your application, this is something to read up on. Key events can get the key code. They can get the text that you typed in as a string. They can check for modifiers. So if you press Control C, instead of just C, for example, I can get the character that was pressed with it. So key events have other things that you can get from it as well. That's why I specifically mentioned the sort of event stuff. And specifically for the one that we're going to draw next, or the program we're going to do next, we're going to use the get code function to be able to figure out what it is. Here's some of the constants. So of course you have A to Z, 0 to 9, but then you have things like you can do home and up, down, left, right for the arrow keys, escape, tab, basically any of the keys on your keyboard. If it's something that's undefined, so if the key code's not defined somewhere, then it'll give you this value if it's undefined. All right, so let's make that one that I mentioned, moving this little piece of text, this little Waldo thing. We're going to use the up, down, left, right arrow keys. All right, so I'm going to get rid of what I had before since I don't specifically need it. Of course, you could always make a new project if you wanted to as well. Okay, so let's just make a generic pane. Make a pane P, and this will just be a new pane. And I'll make sure to import that. And I'm going to make some text. So I'll make a text object, and I'm going to call it Waldo because we're going to move Waldo around. And this will be new text, and the text that I want it to be is Waldo. Of course, we need to import this as well from JavaFX. And let's set Waldo to be at a particular location. So I'm going to say waldo.setX, and we'll put in, say, 100. We'll put him at 100 in the X, and waldo.set Y, we'll put him at 100 in the Y. So we'll put him sort of somewhere closer to the middle of the screen rather than on the very edge. All right, so we're actually almost done. We need the interaction and displaying the sort of window stuff. So I'm going to do the window display stuff here so we can see the GUI to start with. So I'm going to say P, that's my pane, dot get children, dot add, and we're going to add Waldo. So we add him to my pane, and then I'm going to say primary stage, dot set title, and let's set this title to where's Waldo. And stage dot set scene, and we're going to say new scene, and we're going to the pane is going to be the thing we added to the scene, and let's just make the window 200 by 200, and then we'll do primary stage dot show. All right, so let's just see what this looks like to start with. So there's Waldo there. So of course we can expand the size. Waldo's not going to move. We haven't said like center it in the screen or something because we're going to use the arrow keys to move it. So there's our Waldo. So let's add the interaction in. Now we want to do this with key presses. So we're going to take our text object, our Waldo, and I'm going to say Waldo dot set on key pressed. Now this is an event handler key event. So I'm going to create a new event handler. So it's not an action event. That was only for buttons and a few other things. For keys, it's going to be a key event. So we need a key event. And of course, I need to import our key event. Make sure to get the JavaFX version. And then I'm going to put the parentheses and the curly brackets, and then do an enter inside the curly brackets. So I have my space here. And then I'll do my add unimplemented methods, and there is my key event that I want, or my handle for the key event. Now I'm going to rename arg0 here to event, just so it's not just arg0. And now we're going to deal with the key presses themselves. So whenever I press a key on the keyboard, any key on the keyboard, this method is going to run. So let me put that here. Any key press will run this method. But I don't want any key to move this guy around. I want to check what the key code was. I want to check which key is it. So I'm going to say if event.keycode, we'll do event.getCode right here. If that's equal to keycode.up, then I'm going to do something specific. Keycode here is another thing we need to import from JavaFX. So we're going to get the code from the event, which is a key event. So a key event happens when I press on the keyboard. Event is going to be able to tell me what code it was. So if I pressed the up key, we're going to take our Waldo, and we're going to set Waldo's Y to whatever Waldo's Y was, get Y, and we're going to subtract 2. Remember how our coordinate system looks. If we have our window here, Y going down is positive. X going to the right is positive. So if I want to move up, this is negative. So I need to change negative, and we did the exact same thing we did with the radius. We got the current position of the Waldo and made a change, and then set the new position of the Waldo based on that. So it is worth remembering the coordinate system here as well. All right. So we can throw some else ifs in here, I guess. So we can do like else if event.getCode. If that is keycode.down. Actually, actually that'll be fine. And then for here, I'm just going to take I'm just going to copy and paste what we had here, and this time down will be in the plus direction. And then I'm going to take let's just else if events.getCode. If this is the key code dot left, so pressing the left arrow key this time, then we're going to be changing the X direction. So we're going to set Waldo's X, and in that we're going to get the X, and left is negative. I'll do the same thing one last time. I'm just going to copy the whole thing and use right and do positive here. So if you're doing some copying and pasting, just make sure to go back and sort of check some of this stuff. But that's the point. We're going to check for each one of these keys. We're going to do something different depending on what key we press. Now, if you run this right now, save it. So if you run this now, and I start pressing stuff, so you might be able to hear my keyboard, it's not moving. There's no motion happening. And part of that is, let's see if I can get it to go here just by clicking on the right thing, but I don't think I'll be able to get it to actually go. Okay, so what's happening here is technically we don't have focus on the Waldo because we did Waldo.set on key pressed. Let's change this. Let's change this maybe to 2P. Let's change it to the pane. And let's see what happens there. So if I set this to my pane, still nothing. Well, maybe this needs to be the primary stage. Let's try that. Oh, doesn't have a set on key pressed. It might need to be the scene, but we're not actually creating the scene and saving it somewhere. So let's do something slightly different. So I'm going to put Waldo back here. I'm going to put Waldo back here, like how we had it. And after we show the window, so it needs to be after we show the window, I'm going to say, I'm going to say Waldo dot request focus. Once I do this, then Waldo has the focus of essentially the program when we do any key events. So Waldo has the focus. So now it registers these key events. So this is something that's easy to forget. But whatever you wanted to get a key event from, it needs to have focus at the time. This can allow you to, like, say you change focus based on where you've clicked the mouse. So maybe if you click the mouse on a certain window, the focus there means something different, like if you press certain keys when you're focused on a particular window rather than on another one. So it lets you sort of change the focus and then change what certain buttons do depending on your focus. So for us right now, it's just a little bit of a pain, but it's something that you do have to remember. So once I have the focus here, expand my window here, and I start pressing, now I'm moving around. Now it doesn't work if I just hold down. Okay, it does work. It won't work. It has to be pressed. So if you do something here like the other ones, let me show you the other ones here. The other ones here were stuff like released or typed. If you used one of those, then you're going to have to do a full click, a full sort of keyboard press. And these ones won't work if we just hold it down, but the pressed one does. So that's something to consider based on whatever your situation is. So yeah, so we can move this puppy around and do whatever we need to do for our Waldo. Now we can go off the screen. There's nothing I've put in here to make it so it does not go off the screen. It's just a number that's changing. And if the position goes, for example, less than 0y, then it just goes off the screen. It still has a value, it still has a y value, it's just not being displayed anymore. So one of the things that I want you to think about, because we're probably going to do an example similar to this, but it'll be a ball that sort of bounces around the screen. One thing I want you to think about is how would you stop the Waldo from going off the screen? How would you make it so that if I tried to go further than the extent of the screen, so to the right or down, or I try to go less than 0 in the X or the Y, what would you do? What code would you need in here in our event handler to deal with that? Well, it'd probably be something below each one of these lines. As soon as you try to set the Y to, say, less than 0, for instance, then maybe you'll want to set it back to a positive number. So think about maybe how you would deal with that, how you deal with make it so you couldn't go off the edge. Okay, so that's and the code for that's here, including the request focus as well. All right, so that's it for this time. So hopefully the JavaFX stuff was informative. It's something that you will need to use for your final project, which of course is the other part that we talked about today. So make sure that you're familiar with some of this. I will be doing more examples, either during some of the in-person stuff or during the lab time. I'll be doing other examples of sort of useful things potentially for the projects that you guys have. So next time, more event-driven programming. We're going to look a little bit deeper at some of the stuff that you can do with your GUIs.